This is the most brutal betrayal. How narcissists exploit you when you need them most. There is a particular kind of psychological pain that comes from realizing you must rely on someone who has already harmed you. It is an experience many people endure without ever naming it, and yet it quietly reshapes how they see themselves. Unless you have lived an unusually sheltered life, the odds are overwhelming that at least one narcissistic or deeply antagonistic person exists somewhere in your orbit. For some, it is a distant cousin, a manager who drifts in and out of the workplace, or a former co-parent you now only encounter at milestone events. If you are fortunate, their influence is limited. But even then, the damage they cause lingers in the nervous system, stored as memory, anticipation, and caution. For others far less lucky, the narcissistic figure is central, a spouse, a parent, a child, and the relationship is not something you can simply sidestep without serious consequence. When people try to make sense of what happens in these dynamics, they often reach for the language of Stockholm Syndrome. Historically, this concept was used to describe hostages who appeared to form emotional bonds with their captors, sometimes even protecting them or expressing loyalty. But modern trauma psychology has largely moved away from this framing because it misunderstands survival. What was once labeled as emotional attachment is now understood as an adaptive response driven by the nervous system. In the presence of threat, the brain prioritizes safety over logic, appeasement over confrontation. The so-called bond is not affection, it is strategy. Responses like fawning, placating, praising, minimizing one's needs are not signs of weakness or pathology. They are evidence that the body is trying to reduce danger in the only way it knows how. This matters deeply when we talk about narcissistic abuse, because survivors are often accused of having some distorted loyalty to their abuser simply because they remain connected or must rely on them. That narrative is not only inaccurate, it is cruel. It allows observers to ask the wrong questions. Instead of asking why someone harms, manipulates, or dominates another person, society tends to ask why the survivor didn't leave. Why didn't you walk away if it was so bad? How bad could it really be if you stayed? Trauma clinicians are clear about this. People do not remain in harmful dynamics because they enjoy them. They remain because leaving often feels more dangerous than staying. Financial constraints, caregiving responsibilities, shared children, illness, disability, immigration status, workplace power hierarchies. These realities are not abstractions. They are pressures that narrow choice until survival becomes the only metric. And survival sometimes means asking for help from the very person who has proven themselves unsafe. Life does not pause for healing. Crises arrive whether or not you are emotionally prepared. A death, a medical emergency, a house fire, an impossible deadline at work, a caregiving responsibility that cannot be postponed. These moments strip away ideal options and leave only what is available. When resources are limited, when time is short, when there is no money to outsource help or no one else to call, people turn to whoever is there. Trauma psychology explains that under acute stress, the brain shifts into problem-solving mode, not moral evaluation. The goal becomes getting through the crisis, not preserving dignity or emotional safety. This is where the dynamic becomes especially painful. When you ask a narcissistic or antagonistic person for help, you are rarely met with simple cooperation. Instead, the request becomes leverage. You may be reminded, explicitly or implicitly, of your dependence. You might hear comments dripping with superiority or resentment, subtle punishments for past grievances, or manipulative reminders of how much you owe them. Sometimes it is blatant, sarcasm, guilt, threats. Other times it is quieter, but just as destabilizing. A steady stream of texts you cannot ignore, emotional landmines you must carefully navigate, a constant pressure to respond correctly so the help does not vanish. In these moments, people often find themselves doing things they never imagined they would do again. They swallow words. They soften their tone. They praise, thank, reassure, and minimize harm, not because they have forgotten the abuse, but because they understand the stakes. Clinicians describe this as a conscious survival adaptation. This is not unconscious fawning born of confusion. It is deliberate, strategic appeasement. You are not bonding with your abuser. You are managing a threat long enough to get through a crisis. The nervous system knows exactly what it is doing, even if the heart resents every second of it. What makes this especially cruel is that many survivors recognize this pattern from earlier chapters of their lives. There was often a time before they understood narcissistic dynamics, when praise, compliance, and emotional smoothing were automatic. Back then, it felt like love or responsibility. Now, it feels transactional and exhausting. Trauma-informed therapists note that this awareness can intensify shame because survivors judge themselves for going back to behaviors they thought they had outgrown. But growth does not mean you never adapt again. It means you understand why you are adapting. Survival does not invalidate healing. Sometimes it simply pauses it. The most important truth to hold onto is this: relying on someone who harmed you does not mean you admire them, forgive them, or minimize what they did. It means you are navigating reality with the options available to you. That is not Stockholm Syndrome. That is not weakness. That is a nervous system doing what it was designed to do, keeping you alive, functional, and intact in circumstances that were never fair to begin with. There's a quiet desperation threaded through nearly every interaction in a narcissistic relationship, even when it does not look dramatic on the surface. It lives beneath the politeness, beneath the careful wording, beneath the restraint. When you find yourself begging, pleading, thanking, praising, softening your tone, or agreeing to things you do not want, it is almost inevitable that another layer of pain emerges. The feeling that you are the manipulative one, that you are being fake, that you are somehow dishonest for being agreeable to someone who has treated you poorly. Trauma psychology explains this reaction clearly. When survival requires appeasement, the mind often turns inward and assigns blame to the self because it feels safer than fully acknowledging how trapped the situation actually is. This is where shame takes root. You may berate yourself for not standing up for yourself when they send cruel messages, for staying silent when they insult you, for thanking them excessively just to keep the peace. The narcissistic dynamic has a way of magnifying this internal conflict until it feels as though you are not only abandoning yourself, but actively participating in the harm. Survivors often describe this as a sense of complicity, a painful belief that by continuing to engage, they are somehow responsible for the toxicity. Clinically, this is not moral failure. It is survival subjugation, a state in which autonomy is temporarily sacrificed to reduce immediate threat. The nervous system is not asking what is fair or authentic. It is asking what will get you through the moment with the least amount of damage. Over time, this pattern can generate a volatile mix of emotions: bitterness, resentment, rage turned inward, self-disgust, grief, injustice, and a suffocating sense of being stuck. Many people feel anger not only toward the narcissistic person, but toward the world itself for offering so little protection or support. When your back is against the wall and you must rely on someone who invalidates you, strategies like not taking the bait, swallowing your responses, overthanking, flattering, or enduring insults in silence are not signs of weakness. They are expressions of radical acceptance under duress. You are not pretending the person is safe. You are recognizing exactly who they are and adjusting your behavior to survive the interaction with minimal fallout. From a psychological standpoint, awareness is the critical distinction here. Without awareness, people often fall into desperate over-apologizing, emotional bargaining, or the false hope that empathy will suddenly appear if they just explain themselves better. With awareness, strategy replaces illusion. You stop engaging with the fantasy of change and instead keep your eyes fixed on what truly matters in that moment: getting through a crisis, protecting safety, completing something that must be done. This applies whether the relationship is familial, romantic, professional, or social. In situations involving real stakes, health, housing, children, financial survival, clarity becomes a form of self-preservation. Some people worry that this approach feels Machiavellian, as though they are manipulating the narcissistic person. But there is an important psychological distinction. Manipulation involves exploiting another person's vulnerabilities for personal gain. Survival strategy involves managing a power imbalance to prevent harm. The narcissistic person always retains the ability to refuse help. You are not taking advantage of them. You are navigating a system where the power has never been evenly distributed. Ironically, narcissistic personalities are far more skilled at manipulation than most survivors could ever be, and attempting to outplay them is rarely realistic or effective unless deception is already part of your nature. For most people, this is not about winning, it is about enduring. That said, relying on a narcissistic person carries real emotional costs. People who have had to do this often describe feeling dirty afterward, emotionally depleted, anxious, ashamed, and profoundly exhausted. There is also a legitimate fear that repeated reliance will strengthen the fawn response and spill into other areas of life. Trauma-informed clinicians note that this risk is lower when the behavior is conscious and time-limited, but the shame of having to make nice with someone who has harmed you can still linger. What causes the most damage is not the strategy itself. It is the sense of entrapment, the feeling that there is no escape. It is also true that narcissistic individuals will often exploit these moments, banking favors, creating leverage, and storing ammunition they may later use to control or guilt you. You may feel baited, forced into silence, hyper-aware that one wrong response could cost you the help you need. Many survivors describe feeling as though they need to wash themselves clean afterward, both emotionally and physically, while simultaneously blaming themselves for having turned to that person at all. Yet the reality remains. Unless you live an extraordinarily privileged or insulated life, most people will find themselves in this position at least once. Workplaces, families, and financial systems are not designed to ensure that all help comes from safe people. The most grounded guidance here is not about moral purity, but strategic clarity. Stay focused on your true north, getting through the crisis. When the immediate danger or urgency passes, explore alternatives, even if they are uncomfortable, expensive, or exhausting. Many people eventually realize that doing everything themselves, though draining, feels psychologically cleaner than relying on someone who uses dependency as a weapon. Still, this transition takes time, resources, and energy that may not be available in the moment. It is important not to get lost in pride or self-condemnation. Strategy does not mean surrendering your values. It means choosing the least harmful option available. If there is any consolation, it is this: you are not alone and you are not failing. Sometimes survival truly is any port in a storm. Yes, you may later regret having relied on someone who hurt you, but you would also regret letting a crisis deepen because you refused help that was necessary at the time. In narcissistic dynamics, there is no clean victory, no elegant solution, especially in moments of crisis. The goal is not to win. The goal is to endure, to minimize harm, and to preserve enough of yourself to rebuild when the storm finally passes.